Sanctions against Russia should become a tool to force Moscow to negotiate in good faith to end the war against Ukraine. This is the essence of the G7's new approach to sanctions against the aggressor country.
Any new additional sanctions after February should be linked to whether the Russian Federation enters into real good faith efforts to bring an enduring end to the war against Ukraine that provides Ukraine with long-term security and stability as a sovereign, independent country. From a joint statement by G7 foreign ministers on the U.S. State Department website,
The UN has no intention of easing the sanctions pressure on Russia. On the contrary, by the third anniversary of the Russian army's full-scale invasion of Ukraine, the European Union will present a 16th package of restrictions aimed at combating the Russian shadow fleet. The European Commission chief spokesperson Paul Pinion said, "The most painful for Moscow are the sanctions on oil exports." Kit Kellogg, the United States Special Envoy for Ukraine and Russia, emphasized, "It is they who can create significant leverage in the Kremlin, but to do that we need to make the sanctions work."
It's really a petro state. 70% of the money they are getting to fund this war comes out of petro, oil and gas. Most of that is going through the shadow fleet. We, the United States, have sanctioned their fleet by name, the USS Kellogg, the USS Sikorsky, whatever out there. And now you come up with a plan when you talk about sanctions. If you rate them on a level of 1 to 10, 1 being low, 10 being high, we're probably at a 6. But enforcement is about a level 3. So what you say, what does he have to give up? Well, maybe he gives up his oil revenue and we'll force him to do it. Because what you do is you start employing sanctions that break the economic back.
Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has discussed the strengthening of sanctions against Russia with President of Finland Alexander Stubb and Prime Minister of Sweden Ulf Kristersson. Stockholm plans to expand the list of restrictions in the oil and gas sector. Minister for Foreign Affairs of Sweden said,
"I have always said that it is more important to look at what the US does rather than what it says. Now I see that they are imposing sanctions on Russia and discussing new restrictions on the Russian Federation. Sweden will always push this with the EU. Increase sanctions to hit the Russian military economy. We know the restrictions are working, even though the Kremlin is trying to show a different picture of its economy. Hopefully we will see much tougher bans against liquid petroleum gas in the next package of sanctions and a significant expansion of restrictions in general."
Despite the fact that the main buyers of Russian oil are China and India, half of the tankers of the Russian shadow fleet go through the Gulf of Finland and the Baltic Sea, Estonian Foreign Minister Margus Tasakna said. This gives the EU countries an opportunity to effectively fight illegal vessels of the aggressor country, experts believe.
it will be difficult for Russia to manipulate the situation and declare some kind of escalation because nominally these ships are registered to offshore companies somewhere in the United Arab Emirates or on some island states, and Russia denies owning these tankers. Therefore, Russia cannot declare their arrest as an attack against its sovereignty, so here the EU countries have their hands completely free to do whatever they want with these tankers, as long as they have the political will to do so.
Meanwhile, China, one of the main importers of Russian oil, has started replacing Russian oil in its market. According to London Stock Exchange Group Oil Research, in February 2025, exports of Russian fuel to China will amount to 10.3 billion barrels, almost 1 million barrels less than a year ago. Analysts explain due to sanctions against Russia, there is a trend in Asia to increase oil supplies from Angola and Brazil. Reported by Alexander Zaslavitz and Andriy Dmitrenko, UATV News.
Washington may impose stricter sanctions on Russia if the Kremlin refuses to reach a peace agreement with Ukraine that includes long-term guarantees for Kyiv, U.S. Vice President JD Vance stated in an interview with the Wall Street Journal. According to him, Washington is considering various measures to pressure Moscow, both economic and military. This includes the potential deployment of U.S. troops to Ukraine if Moscow refuses to engage in what he called good faith negotiations. The United States is committed to ensuring Ukraine retains its sovereignty and independence, Vance emphasized. He also noted that depending on how negotiations develop, Donald Trump might revise his stance on the matter.
President Trump could say, "Look, we don't want this thing. We might not like this thing, but we're willing to put it back on the table if the Russians aren't being good negotiating partners, or there are things that are very important to Ukrainians that we might want to take off the table." J.D. Vance, Vice President of the United States, in an interview with the Wall Street Journal.
The European Union is also preparing new restrictions against the aggressor state. Ahead of the third anniversary of Russia's invasion of Ukraine, the European Commission is working on its 16th sanctions package. The measures will target the import of Russian fossil fuels. European Commission spokesperson Paolo Pino announced.
I do not know exactly what the US has in mind and the Defense Secretary when they speak about sanctions on energy. I don't think that they have been explicit about it, but we, on our side, on the side of the EU, have a number of packages. We're now on the 16th being debated, which affect also energy and which contribute to the gradual phasing out of our imports of fossil fuels from Russia. They are part also of our gradual phasing out of dependence on fossil fuels from Russia, which is also again reiterated in our what we call the Repower EU objectives, which is indeed to gradually, totally phase out.
While Kyiv's partners discuss additional sanctions, experts are analyzing the impact of those already in place. For instance, US sanctions imposed in January 2025 against Russia's shadow fleet have already disrupted 60% of sanctioned vessels, halting their oil transportation. This data gathered by Bloomberg's ship tracking sources suggests that these sanctions, combined with strikes on Russia's energy infrastructure, will force the aggressor state to reduce fuel production. Analysts say
the output cuts could start small, with Russia's production slipping below 9 million barrels per day, BPD, in the coming months, but may accelerate if tanker shortages and refining outages persist, the executive said. There are already signs of weakening crude exports in trading data. Volumes from Russia's western ports of Primorsk, Ust-Luga, and Novorossiysk in January were down 17% from a year earlier, Reuters calculations based on traders' data showed, from the Reuters publication.
Experts believe the effects of sanctions will become even more apparent in the near future, with existing economic difficulties worsening due to new restrictions.
With ruble, I don't even doubt that. So it was too much. First of all, it's the exchange rate which is not comfortable for many of the exporters and which is not comfortable for the federal budget. We've seen that last year, and no doubt there will not be much federal budget revenues. Nothing to impress, actually, if from not from the negative side. And many exporters will feel themselves uncomfortable with imagine that for a second, that such an exchange rate like 90 plus, a little bit greater than 90, will stay for at least a few weeks.
Over the long term, Russia could face a sharp decline in economic activity. According to analysts from Reuters, who examined reports from the Russian Central Bank and the Ministry of Economic Development, the Kremlin overly rigid policies to curb inflation are slowing economic growth, the report states. However, the document's authors are particularly concerned about a potential increase in oil production by the US and OPEC countries, which could lead to a drop in fuel prices. As a result, analysts predict that in the coming years the Kremlin will be forced to reduce budget expenditures. Reported by Serhiy Kulas, Andriy Dmytrenko, UATV News.